Hello everyone, my name is Ambi Omega, and my presentation is called The Man Behind the Name, a look at Mark Twain's authorial intent. At the 2013 Mark Twain Humor Awards, actress and comedian Carol Burnett stood up on stage and she told the story about when she was a little girl and how she would make funny faces and say funny things, and her grandmother, whenever she would see her, would say, "Stop that, quit that, nothing will come of it. Nothing will come of it." So after being introduced by some of the biggest celebrities of today and musicians, she stood on stage, held on to that statue of Mark Twain, and in a way told her grandma, look at all the nothing that came out of it. And though this is great that she was able to be honored in this way, none of this would have been possible had it not been for the humorous works of Mark Twain. And Mark Twain was from his family, when he was young, his family moved to a little town called Hannibal. And after the death of his father, he worked as a printer. And though he was a printer, he also worked on articles, and that's where he got his beginnings. Not only writing, but writing about things that are current and relevant. And so after working as a printer, he worked on a steamboat, and this allowed him to get out of that little small town, you know, and look at America a little bit more. And when the Civil War broke out, he moved to the West. He moved to the West to avoid fighting in the Civil War because he didn't want to do that. And this is where the Jumping Frog of Calaveras County comes in. Now this is the work that basically put Twain on the map. The story is of a man who is from the East. And there's a stigma about the East people being all hippity and high and, you know, classy, and then the West are the West people, you know. And so he goes in and he wants to know about this guy. He wants to hear a story about this guy named Leonidas Smiley, you know. And he goes into this miners community and he talks to this man, and this man tells him about a Jim Smiley. So it went from like this fancy name to, okay, it's just Jim. And this Jim was a gambler. He would gamble on anything he could find. It said he was the curiousest man about always betting on anything that turned up you ever see if you could get anybody to bet on the other side. And if you couldn't, he changed sides. And so that gives you a look at that character. And Smiley, he had a number of pets that he'd always race. And two in particular stood out the most. One was a dog named Andrew Jackson, after the president Andrew Jackson. And this dog was small. When you look at him, you wouldn't be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is a dog that wins tons of races, you know? And this kind of represented Andrew's personality. Because Andrew was a man of the people. And a thing I forgot to tell you is that Jumping Frog is a satire. And a satire is basically something somebody wrote or talked about that just basically makes fun of people in society and things like that. So yeah, there's that. And so yeah, the dog, so Andrew Jackson, he said he was a man of the people. And just like the dog is an underdog. Literally an underdog. And so the dog would win all of his races, and he would win all of his races by jumping on the hind legs of the other dogs and going over them and going. And so that's how he won. And that kind of parallels Andrew Jackson's personality. They said, you know, though he was a man of the people and he was a normal average Joe, he had somewhat of a temper. So it is said that he fought in a number of duels which proved fatal for his opponents. So that kind of gives you a look at Jackson's personality versus the dog's personality. And the other pet that Smiley had was a frog, and this frog was named Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster was also a senator of the state, and Smiley taught this frog, Daniel Webster, to jump higher than any other frog. And that paralleled Daniel Webster, the senator of state, because he was an intelligent man, you know, he knew what he wanted and he went after it, and you know, he usually achieved it. And this frog would win all of the bets, except for one time, when somebody came in and fed the frog something that made it stay still. And this paralleled the fact that Andrew Webster, though he was so educated and though he was winning all of his things, he ran for president and he didn't become president, he didn't make it. And so I believe that this was Mark Twain's way of saying, you know, Daniel Webster should have won, but it was kind of sad and not his fault that he didn't win. Twain did public speaking as well as writing, and he liked this very much. He's very famous for it. And his It said that the Sandwich Island speech was his most famous speech. And in the Sandwich Island speech, Twain was supposed to go up on stage and tell people about his time that he spent in the Sandwich Islands, which is where we now know as Hawaii. And at the time, the white Americans were going in and they were bringing their education and civilization to the native people. He said the white people doubled the educational facilities, and it was just the same as turning smallpox in a community that hadn't been vaccinated at all. If they start but a few more seminaries of learning, it will surely finish them. So basically he was saying that the Americans came in, brought their civilization, and brought disease, and they killed off a lot of the natives, more than half of them. And you know, he was expected to go in and talk about all the goodness that the Americans were doing by bringing civilization to these savages who clearly weren't living well enough before the people came. And that went against the grain at the time, because people wanted to come and hear that, yeah, Americans are doing great, they're perfect, you know. And when you have something to say that other people don't agree with, and it's not true to their reality, then of course there's going to be opposition, and that's what happened. Though the speech was pretty well liked, there were some critics. One in particular was this person who remains nameless because he didn't even write his name on his article criticizing it. He titled it the Many Citizens article. And in his article, he said his intimation that civilization was responsible for the decrease of population there is another insult to America. So he's insulted at the fact that white people came and brought civilization, and Twain would say that they brought this dirty disease to these savages. So I am so insulted. And that made up a number of Twain's critics. Like some people, it went against the grain, and so some people just didn't appreciate that. And another side of his critics was this guy named Bishop. First of all, Bishop, before beginning his article, he basically titles it Criticism of Mark Twain's Lecture for Adult Readers, Not to be Read by People with Weak Stomachs. So we look at Mark Twain's work and we're like, oh yeah, this is normal. You know, people always make satires, make fun of politicians. But no, you see here, if you can't even read a criticism of what he had to say, that his work was pretty new, it was revolutionary, is what it was. And in this he said, okay, yeah, you know, the speech was good, but it was funny. Is all it was, you know. It had no merit. I was learning absolutely nothing. And Twain didn't take that too well. He had these unsent letters that were found, and in the unsent letters to the critics, he said, I have long awaited to meet you, get acquainted with you, and kill you. And you want a consulship? What you want is a rope. I will send you one. The thing for you is a burial permit. You have only to speak. I will see that you get it. And basically this kind of shows Twain versus Clemens. So Twain's character, this persona, this guy who, you know, he's so intelligent and he's really good at looking at people. And then there's Clemens, who is really sensitive about his work and a little insecure, you know. He felt like these people were criticizing my work, but what I had to say was the truth. And for you to criticize truth makes your argument invalid. It's baseless. So, you know, that just showed how people took his work. And Twain was always thinking about how people would take his work. You know, he knew that a lot of controversy surrounded what he did. And he understood the fact that, you know, if there is controversy around my work, then sometimes it fuels the sale as well. But in this case of the war prayer, that was not it. He felt as if society was not ready for this. This would step on too many people's toes. So he told his people, don't publish this until after I died. And in the war prayer is about, you know, it starts off with the tone of like the Star Spangled Banner. So like there's this people and they're going to war and it's gallant and it's great. And so there's a congregation and they are praying for their victory in war. Like it said things like, people who don't have sons wish they had sons just so they can send them off to this war to gain victory for us. And in the middle of their prayer, this man in white, he walks up, he stands at the altar and he says, okay, God has heard your prayers, and he won't answer them until you know what they really are. So while you're over here praying for your victory in war, you're praying for the despair of others. While you're praying for all of this glory and stuff, you're praying for people to die and families to be torn apart. And after the people said, okay, they heard it, and then they continued praying the same way. So in the end, it starts off with this gallant, oh, war and everything's so good, and then their prayer becomes uncovered for what it really is. So they pray, help us to cover their smiling fields with the pale form of their patriot dead. Help us to drown the thunder of guns with the shrieks of their wounded writhing in pain. So these people were in fact praying to their God, who was supposed to be a good God, and a God of all his people, but they're praying for their death and to hear their shrieks, writhing in pain, and though this isn't a humorous, funny piece, it's a Bergsonian kind of funny. And Bergsonian humor is humor that it's more dark. And in his article, Henry Bergson, he wrote that humor is something that has to relate to humans, basically. So in order for us to find something funny, it has to relate to something that is human. He also wrote that his kind of humor is from the rigidity of people. So people are this rigid, and they're doing what they're doing until they realize, some outside force tells them that what they're doing is in fact not right, but they continue to do it because they don't listen. And so that's where it's kind of funny. And that's the case of this, because these people were praying and they found out what their prayers were and they kept going. And so this really solidified for his viewers what Mark Twain's view on organized religion was. And then there's the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which we all know. Before he even went into his novel, Twain put up a notice, and it said, persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot in it will be shot. So basically, this was Twain's way of telling his critics, if you have something you want to say about this, it will be fiercely opposed. This was his way of saying, try me, because this stuff is good. And in it, there was a quote that said, Adam was but human. This explains it all. He did not want the apple for the apple's sake. He wanted it only because it was forbidden. The mistake was not forbidding the serpent. Then he would have eaten the serpent. And this just shows how Twain was a fierce observer of society. It goes back to his notice. He's saying, don't find any motive, don't find any plot, don't find anything useful in this, because he knows what will people do. They'll go ahead and try and find it. And he's basically saying, there's good stuff in this. Go ahead and read this because it's really good, basically. And humor, before the 1900s, humor was not something that was regarded in an educational sense. Philosophers hardly ever spent time writing about humor until this time. And there's Plato, this philosopher that we've all at least heard his name, and he said, the guardians of the state should avoid laughter. So he's saying, basically, if you want to be taken seriously, then you should avoid laughter, because laughter is synonymous with irrationality. And we think about our world today, and that is just not true to our reality, because we turn on the TV, and what do we watch? The news. And there are shows like the Rachel Maddow show and the Stephen Colbert show, which makes fun of politics and things that happen like that. And it's so present in our reality. And that all started with Twain for the most part. And it's clear why he is so relevant today. And going back to the Humor Awards and Carol Burnett, and how she said, how she went against what her grandmother was saying. She went against the grain and did what she thought was good and funny. And, she got so much for it. and here's Twain, and he said, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did. So throw off the bowline, sail away from the safe harbor. Catch the trade winds in your sail. Explore, dream, discover. And that's exactly what he did, and that's why he's so famous and so relevant today. Like, there's Twain's work in so many books and lectures and things like that. And it's obvious that Twain was not only a writer, but he was a person way ahead of his time. And it is clear, it is set in stone why he is relevant now, which is about 2-3 generations later, and he will be relevant as time goes on. Thank you.
Questions? It's 15 minutes, it's 17 seconds. Questions?
Did this project change your mind about who Mark Twain was or Sam Clemens?
Well, yes, because before this, I know that Sam Clemens, Mark Twain, he was Sam Clemens, and there was a difference. But in doing this, I realized how Twain and Clemens were two very different people. And the fact that Clemens would even hide behind a pen name says something about, what he's trying to say. Because he is out there putting his opinion out there, but on one hand, he's not even putting his real name out there. So yeah, doing this really opened up my eyes to really how Twain operated, what kind of person he was. Because he had this huge persona, but then, maybe if you knew him in real life, it would have been a lot different.
I don't know. Did people know that Mark Twain was Sam Clemens? Or was that kept quiet?
I'm not sure. I did not find that in my research.
Samuel Clemens published. Do you know that Samuel Clemens published under the name Samuel Clemens some? To what extent?
I don't know. My assumption was always that it was pretty commonly known.
But yeah, that he was Samuel. Mark Twain was Samuel Clemens, but I don't know how much.
I was trying to remember. I read the story about why he adopted the pen name.
Oh, it's the Mark and the. I mean, y'all had that in your papers at some point, in your presentations at some point. Y'all took it out probably for time. But can you explain how he got the name Mark Twain?
Oh, whenever he was working on a steamboat, what it was Mark Twain it was a saying for something that they were working on something.
2 fathoms.
It's about the depth of the water, but the reason that he adopted a pen name, he was hiding or running from something. I don't remember what it was.
Was he avoiding the war?
That he was in trouble with somebody, and that's one of the reasons he went out west, besides to avoid the war. There was something in his personal life that he was fleeing from. But to get back to the question, I don't know for sure, but my assumption has always been that it was pretty commonly known who he was. Really.
Because he was a speaker towards the end of his life, or he spoke. He might have been a speaker the entire time, his entire life. But I know towards the end of his life, or towards the end of his career at least, he gave quite a few public engagements, or spoke at quite a few public engagements. I don't know, but if he spoke, I would imagine that they would know that he was both people. Is that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you have a question? I have a question, and I'm not an instructor, so I'm gonna let okay. The problem I always have with reading Twain is I just don't ever know how we're supposed to approach his texts. To what extent is he being serious? To what extent is he being satirical? To what extent is this sort of meta humor? I know I'm being satirical, so I'm going to guide y'all in a different direction because I'm being satirical. So in the war prayer, in the war prayer and in Letters from the Earth, which is written from the point of view of Satan, he's pretty critical of religion. Yet we have to keep in mind that it's Twain who's writing this. Is he critical of religion, or is he critical of people who are critical of religion?
People who are critical of religion?
Yes.
I believe that he is critical of organized religion. He is critical of the people who are religious and say that they are, and the things that they do after saying that they are religious is what I believe. So I don't know if he really disliked religion, but he did dislike what people did while saying that they were religious.
Hypocrisy of it all, basically.
Yes.
And, she tells him to say it, or tell us how to say his prayers, and they own slaves.
They won't let the slaves in. They let the slaves in to say the prayers, but they still have slaves.
There's like one example from like letters, like where Satan's talking about, okay, I put a bunch of regular different animals in a cage. They ended up like living in harmony after a week. I put a multitude of people from different religions and stuff came back after a week. They were all dead.
I think it would depend on which animals you put in the cage. I'm seeing half of them getting eaten. The other half being enslaved.
Thank you.
Thank you.